Life is an ocean. Today everything can be calm, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, and in general everything is calm. And tomorrow a real storm has begun, which destroys everything to the ground. My wife, with whom I have lived together for more than 20 years, caused a real storm in my life when I found out about her numerous infidelities to me. It was the most terrible period in my life. After leaving Bremerhaven and heading back to the United States, we encountered severe gale force winds, as noted in the bridge report the next morning. The storm had unexpectedly shifted eastward, forcing us to seek refuge in Portsmouth, England, with 350 nautical miles still separating us from a return to Germany. While sheltering in Portsmouth was a prudent emergency measure, it meant we would have to wait in line again to depart. Nevertheless, the directive was clear. Proceed to Portsmouth and await further instructions. The Molly Sen, registered in Panama, is a 260-meter container ship carrying 6,250 TEU of cargo on this voyage, predominantly industrial products and component supplies for auto assembly plants in the United States. This journey marked my 18th round trip across the Atlantic on the Molly. Upon docking in Charleston, I would need to make decisions regarding my 30-year milestone, including options for my vested pension and medical benefits. Standing on the port side, away from the railing, I observed the harbor master boarding to take command of the bridge, guiding the Molly into the channel and alongside the dock. This was a routine procedure in most bustling ports. The master, Roger Chafee, whom I had known from his days working in Southampton and from our earlier seafaring days, was one of the finest in his field. "Good to see you, Max. Once we're done here, let's grab a bite and a pint at the ferry, eh?" Roger declared more than asked, and I couldn't refuse his offer of hospitality. "You know we will," I chuckled. Later that evening, after handing over the watch to my second, I joined Roger at the Ferry House Inn. Over what were arguably the best fish and chips in the southern region, we reminisced about old triumphs and shared tales from both sides of the Atlantic. "So, how's your lovely missus back in Charleston?" he inquired after we'd exchanged countless stories of mischief and adventure. My hesitation didn't go unnoticed, and the pain in my eyes betrayed me. Roger, having experienced similar hardships at sea, nodded in understanding. "We parted ways a few voyages back. Seems she found someone else to keep her company while I was away," I admitted reluctantly. "Damn, mate, that's rough," Roger said, motioning for the barmaid to bring us a couple of shots. "Let's drink to the good women wherever they are, and as for the rest, well, to hell with them, as you Yankees say." Roger's words struck a chord. I had always considered Tammy Waters a good woman, at least for a long time before things changed. 6 months earlier. "Man, it feels great to be back on solid ground," I told my first officer as I dragged the tote behind me. He was headed to Greenville upstate, and we'd rendezvous again in 6 weeks. The crew and another captain of the Molly were gearing up for a trip down to South America once they finished reloading. "I can give you a lift, Captain. No trouble at all," he offered, his arm around his bride. I accepted and had him drop me off at City Market, where I grabbed a dozen roses for Tammy. Long-stemmed whites, her favorite. We were in port a couple of days early, and I wanted to surprise her. Normally, I'd call from the ship a day or two out to check her plans. The neighborhood buzzed with tourists and students from the College of Charleston, and the scent of countless culinary treats filled the air in the open markets and streets around us. I had moved into the neighborhood a couple of years after Hurricane Hugo had left its mark on the city. I snagged a city house off Anson Street at a bargain price, abandoned by its New Jersey owners who'd had their fill of our subtropical climate after the storm damaged their roof. Their loss was my gain. After dedicating considerable effort and determination over a span of a few years, I brought the property up to the standard of the neighborhood's historic charm. With the assistance of a skilled old ironsmith, we restored all the street-facing and garden wrought iron fencing. The result was a 3-story city house, painted in soft pastel pink with dark green hurricane shutters, but it sat empty. As a 26-year-old ship's engineer spending 10 weeks at sea, followed by 6 weeks in port, I felt I had done reasonably well for myself. A few years later, Tammy Waters introduced herself with a ring of the doorbell. Initially expecting another young college student to fill the vacancy left by the previous graduate, I couldn't shake off my worries about the empty house during my sea voyages. Eventually, a crewmate suggested renting out rooms to screened tenants, and I found a steady stream of potential renters among the local college students. I ended up renting out 2 rooms on the 3rd floor to a couple of girls, and from then on, when one graduated, the other would find a replacement. I was expecting the new tenant when I answered the door. "Mr. Bunyan? Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Waters. I understand you're planning to lease a room to my sister, Patty Waters." She waited expectantly as I welcomed her inside. "Yes, she seems like a fine girl, and the young lady who just left spoke highly of her," I responded. "Well, I promised her I'd check it out. One can never be too cautious these days." I offered her refreshments, and to my surprise, she chose an IPA, which significantly raised my opinion of the family. I was further impressed by her striking beauty. She reminded me of a young Catherine Zeta-Jones, dark-haired, full-lipped, with a generous figure. She inspected the living quarters, and I gave her a complete tour of the house, concluding in the narrow courtyard at the back. I had adorned the small space with various plants and potted flowers. In the soft evening light, it transformed into a charmingly romantic garden. Unfortunately, under the harsh mid-afternoon sun and Charleston's 90-degree heat and humidity, it didn't quite retain that romantic allure. Nevertheless, she approved, and I invited both her and her sister to dinner the next evening. This led to subsequent dates until we became one of those loosely committed couples who navigate life until circumstances push one or the other to make a decision. At that time, it wasn't necessary. Tammy understood my career at sea. Her father had been a career enlisted man in the Navy. She was an assistant professor of fine arts at the college, on track for tenure if she chose to pursue it. Since we both loved the city, it was expected that she would accept tenure and stay if the opportunity arose. And because of that, we settled into the comfortable life our circumstances allowed. We had been together for almost 3 years when she decided to move in with me and rent out her small bungalow west of the Ashley River. By then, I was a 35-year-old engineer, poised to advance to first officer whenever the chance came. It was initially strange, despite having rented rooms to college girls for nearly a decade, a practice I continued even after Tammy moved in. Before I met her, I had no shortage of female company. I thought I had always been reserved in dealing with girls in the house. Some found it unusual, while others were intrigued by the fantasies. It was just fun for me. It was the same with her. None of us had any experience when we met, and our bed life was always eventful and memorable. When we finally got married, I was 40 and she was almost 36. Children weren't in our future. She couldn't conceive due to medical reasons, a fact she had accepted since her early 20s. Given our lifestyles, this was never a concern for us. I must admit there have been temptations over the years, as one might expect in my line of work. I've traveled to over 100 ports, from Charleston to the Orient, even as far as the remote Pechora River in Bitter Russia. There are always women of various persuasions in ports, some lower on the social ladder, others earning as much as a ship's captain. However, with few exceptions when I was unattached, I always resisted such pursuits. Tammy faced her own temptations being at home and around so many men while I was away for weeks navigating the high seas. We had an understanding. Neither of us strayed because we simply didn't want to. Of course, either of us could have been unfaithful without the other knowing, except for a slip-up. But we trusted each other not to. I trusted her, and I know she trusted me. After years of marriage, and even longer together before that, I strolled up Anson Street, feeling at ease with the state of our lives. "Good morning, Mr. Bunyan. Was your trip good?" Mr. Shields, my neighbor since I bought the house, inquired. His wife had passed away a couple of years earlier, and he had found solace in his other passions, nurturing orchids in his rooftop garden. "Yes, sir. Smooth sailing and good meals on the other side." I waved back at him as I turned the corner towards my own home. The latch on the iron gate leading to the courtyard along the side wall had recently broken and needed welding to fix, but it still kept the gate closed. I never entered through the front door. It had always been my habit to inspect the garden before going inside. Tammy parked by the curb and used the front entrance, as did visitors, but my routines were deeply ingrained. The rear entrance leads into a brief corridor that opens into the kitchen and pantry, then extends to the front rooms and bathroom. I casually hung my jacket over a kitchen chair and found a vase for the flowers. There were a couple of croissants left in a bakery box on the counter, so I helped myself before moving into the front parlor and kicking off my shoes. Since it was still early for dinner, I assumed she wouldn't be home yet and went upstairs to change and organize my belongings. Perhaps due to my engineering background and attention to detail, I quickly noticed something that caught my eye. The toilet seat was up, and in the shower there was a bottle of body wash I didn't recognize. A blue gel with an outdoorsy scent, nothing like what Tammy would use. It seemed more fitting for a man, much like a raised toilet seat. This had been a point of contention in the past. During all the years when young women lived in the house, I never found the toilet seat up in the other two bathrooms. Tammy used to tease me about it, and after we moved in together, she trained me well to be mindful of the preferences of women. Therefore, returning home after nearly 10 weeks away and finding the seat up in our bathroom was quite unsettling. I suppose it's not as unsettling as catching them in the act. One of my friends stumbled upon that unfortunate situation and ended up spending a month in jail after ensuring the other guy spent his month in the hospital, and they weren't even married yet. No, this was bad enough, even though I kept telling myself there might be a good reason why the toilet seat was up and a man's body wash was in my bathroom. I couldn't think of one, but there could be. After getting dressed, I went downstairs to check messages from the ship before heading out again, putting on a brave face and heading down to Henry's house for a pint. Henry's is a local bar nearby that caters to those of us who enjoy a good drink and some soothing jazz. My old friend Satch runs the place, and I can always rely on his special touch and a word of advice, whether I ask for it or not. "You look like a cat on a prowl, old man," he shouted as I walked in. The meat market crowd wouldn't show up until evening, so there were just a few regulars around. "When did you get back?" "Didn't you hear my whistle?" "Gave you 2 quick ones," I replied. He chuckled and said he thought it was just the little tug that could. Satch earned his nickname due to his handsome appearance, charm, and love for the smooth jazz that filled the place. Despite the recent turnover among regulars, he always appreciated his loyal patrons. "I've been a regular here for years, alongside half a dozen others. We've seen a few go, a couple due to deceitful spouses, and others who moved away. Maximilian's Golden IPA is next," he announced into the microphone. His real name is Maxwell, but I've never minded his flair for the dramatic. "Oh, and before I forget, Dave Hoff stopped by earlier asking if you'd been in." Dave used to be a regular until his wife's scheming and a change in location took him away. But he's a good guy with his head on straight. His ex-wife Tracy, on the other hand, well, she's something else, but time might teach her a lesson. She lost a good man. "Satch found a letter for you," he called from the end of the bar. I opened it, enjoying the beer in front of me, and chuckled when I read an invitation to a wedding at Lake Texoma in Oklahoma. My laughter must have echoed down the street. "He's marrying his ex's sister, can you believe it?" I exclaimed with amusement. The wedding was in 4 weeks, and since I had 6 to prepare, it sounded like an adventure. "Here's to Dave and whatever crazy antics he's diving into," I toasted to our small group that afternoon. I finished my pint, gathered my thoughts, and prepared for my own journey up the street. Tammy hadn't returned home by 8 p.m., and I hadn't called her to let her know I was back. Instead, I sat in the armchair near the parlor windows, gazing out into the street beyond. It was one of those moments when I almost wished I had one of those soft, furry house cats. We had 2 of them on the ship, despite regulations prohibiting it officially. As dusk began to darken the sidewalk, her car pulled up a couple of spaces down from the curb. I had just finished my 2nd pint of ale since returning home. A million questions raced through my mind, along with twice as many doubts. I had no faith in any of the answers, especially as I watched the two of them approach the walkway. I was damn certain both were heading straight for their nest when she turned and embraced the man. A lingering kiss sent him on his way to the Audi parked across the street, the one with the College of Charleston faculty sticker on its windshield. I'd met him before. He was the chair of the department where she worked, a swaggering man with the intellect of a scholar and the temperament of a fool, easily a decade older than me. I almost chuckled to myself. Tammy was an incredibly attractive woman. If she had wanted a lover, she could have had any number of suitors a dozen years her junior or more. Yet here she was, entwined with this toad of a man. It couldn't be for tenure. She already had that. Money wasn't an issue, and I knew I satisfied her in bed. I just shook my head and turned toward the door when her key finally slid the deadbolt back into place. She walked into the foyer, exhaling as though it marked the end of a taxing day, I suppose. My mind briefly flashed back to our first meeting outside that same foyer. In my memory, she remained as beautiful as ever, until a stain of ugliness began to spread over it. She started towards the kitchen, perhaps sensing something amiss, or reacting to the startled scampering of my imaginary cat. Suddenly, she stopped and turned. The room was dimming, but I could see it in her eyes when her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. You're home?" she asked, as if the figure before her were a figment of her imagination. "The car horn this afternoon. That was you?" I simply nodded, glancing out the window. From my vantage point, she had to know I'd seen them. "Why didn't you call me?" "I thought I'd surprise you with an early return. Looks like I should have called." She paused briefly, then her artistic tendencies took over. "Max. Oh no. Thomas. We just had dinner this evening, that's all." She attempted a smile, but even with years of coaching students, she couldn't master the deceit required to deceive her husband. "Can I assume?" He paid and expected more at the door. "Max, please, it wasn't like that." She struggled, knowing the curtain had fallen after the embrace, not before. "What was it like, Tammy, kissing a toad like that?" She gave her best effort, but we both knew the truth. She was with Thomas Pryor, Ph.D., the philandering husband of other men's wives. "I'm going out for a while. You should pack a few things and stay somewhere else, maybe with Thomas. You can return his cool mountain breeze in the shower if it's his." "Max, please, can we—" I cut her off with a raised hand. She cried softly while my heart broke. I had realized earlier, that afternoon in the dimly lit parlor with just the two of us, how unbearable the pain was, at least for me. As I left the house and wandered down East Bay Street, directionless and hungry after only snacking on bar pretzels and a croissant, I stumbled upon the Market Street Saloon. There I ordered wings and fried mushrooms, which were served by a waitress in a scanty outfit. It was an odd comfort for a middle-aged man reeling from a betrayal. Or perhaps not. The clientele was a mix, mostly younger, but they undeniably served the best wings on the peninsula. The waitress gave me space to contemplate my situation. Thomas Pryor was already married, not that it seemed to matter. Perhaps he preferred Tammy's company over his wife's, though I was fairly certain of that. Rumor had it Mrs. Pryor could handle cattle with ease on the side. It felt wrong to think of her that way, yet I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, grasping at any humor to maintain a semblance of sanity. Nevertheless, someone, maybe even Thomas, was playing house in my domain, and Tammy must have known that was a deal-breaker. The moment I stepped into the house, it was eerily dark and unusually quiet, starkly contrasting the warm, welcoming home it had been for so many years. Tammy had gathered a few belongings, and her car was gone. In the bathroom, I noticed the bath gel was missing. Whether she took it with her or threw it away, I didn't bother to think about. I felt defeated, tossing my shirt over the bedpost before succumbing to a fitful sleep. At dawn, Breaking my routine, I skipped breakfast and instead grabbed my bike, heading towards the battery at the tip of the peninsula. I needed a release, a place to gather my thoughts. Sitting on the stone battery, overlooking the harbor and beyond, provided the perfect setting for contemplation. Yet overthinking crept in, casting doubt on everything I once believed was right. Of course, I had to deal with the images that appeared in my imagination. Did she give him pleasure with the same intensity as she had with me before? How did it happen? All these thoughts about what unfaithful lovers are doing have only increased my anxiety. However, there were more serious concerns. I didn't want our marriage to break up. I put too much time and emotion into it to allow such an end. Did Pryor have a one-time affair, or were there many men in our bed, perhaps over the years? This is the danger of overthinking when the mind is inactive or disturbed. Both paths lead to a desperate attempt to fix everything, almost like a Faustian bargain, to regain what was lost. And that was the problem. I no longer knew for sure how things used to be. One thing was clear. I needed to sit down and talk to Tammy, putting aside the overwhelming feeling of emptiness. Her boss had an affair with her in our bed while I was at sea, and she seemed unfazed by it. To overcome this serious obstacle, if possible, was necessary, although I was not sure that it was feasible. Later, I found out that Tammy had gone to stay with her sister, the same sister who rented a room from me when we first met. Tammy retained the bungalow, and when her sister's marriage broke up, she allowed her to move there after the previous tenant's lease expired. Whether Pryor visited her there or not, I didn't know. This will have to wait until we talk. Outside, the rain drummed softly through the kitchen window overlooking the backyard, preventing us from leaving the house, which had turned from a happy one into an abandoned one. She looked exhausted, and at the same time strangely attractive. Maybe it was my imagination or desire. I can't tell. Max, this isn't what I ever desired. Please trust me. What were you hoping for, Tammy? I asked, attempting to gauge her thoughts. She struggled to find an answer to my question. I couldn't blame her. I wouldn't know how to respond if I were in her position. Is Pryor what you truly want? She let out a bitter laugh, her face reflecting a mix of emotions. God, no. Working together now feels impossible. It was a stupid mistake, Max. One I can't justify. Yet you were with him this week, I probed, though she didn't realize. No, Max. I ended things completely the night I left here. I called him from the bungalow. He resisted at first, but when I threatened to tell Sophie, he backed down. I imagined Sophie Pryor, weighing 200 pounds, forcefully throwing Thomas to the ground, smashing his glasses and smiling slightly. Out of all these jerks, Tammy, why the hell did you pick that damn toad? I just don't get it. To be honest, I do not know, except that he continued to put pressure on me, reminding me how much I owed him, how he helped me get the position. He continued to flatter me, keep me company, and remind me of my loneliness. Before I knew it, we were having dinner, then drinking, and he started taking me to his favorite places. It's become a habit. One night he got me drunk, took me home, and then we became close. He didn't force me. I did it voluntarily, although if I hadn't been drunk that first time, it probably wouldn't have happened. But it happened. We continued dating for about a month before you came back. That's the main question, Tammy. You know what it is. People are gossiping. How many other people were there before this jerk? If I expected her to hesitate or stumble with an answer, I was mistaken. 3. There were 3 other men before Thomas. I wanted to be surprised, but not completely. They were all there before we got married, Max, before I moved in with you, and you don't know any of them. None of them live here anymore. They were students. This revelation surprised me, but before I could answer, she continued. I struggled with your absence at sea, Max. It was incredibly difficult for a long time, but I love you and never let you know. At the time, I just assumed you were occasionally doing it in some distant place, unaware of my actions. It happened years ago, and honestly, I can't deny it. It was purely physical and helped ease the loneliness, maybe once a month while you were away. There was no romance or relationship, it was just intimacy, nothing more. Maybe it was the loneliness of being a woman on my own with my man away so often. When I committed to us by moving in together, I ended it. Until this last trip. And now, I've ruined everything, haven't I? I believed her, and her actions before she moved in with me weren't an issue, though the dishonesty still stung. I had never done that to her. Tammy, it's the present situation that's hard for me. Pryor has taken over our bed, and I need time to deal with that if I even can. If I can't, well, I don't know. Tears welled up in her eyes as I handed her a tissue. After a long pause, she continued. I understand. That's why I'm reluctantly taking a 6-month fellowship at the university in Vancouver. It will distance me from Pryor, and I can maintain my position and tenure at Charleston. They're sending someone else here in my place. That was fast. You'd made up your mind before we even talked. I hadn't mentioned it earlier because I wasn't planning to accept. But things have changed now, haven't they? Yes, unfortunately. You know I'm nearing my 30-year mark and had decisions to make. This complicates things, obviously. She didn't respond, but I could sense her acknowledgement of the difficulty. Oh, and I meant to tell you earlier. Dave Hoff is getting remarried next month, and I intend to attend. He's marrying Tracy's sister Tori, of all people. I never saw that coming. If you're still around, we could put our issues aside for a while if you're interested. I threw that out there, giving her the chance, though I knew it hardly mattered. I wish I had known. I'll be in Vancouver by the end of the month. Maybe that's for the best, regardless, Max. We ended things there, sharing a painful hug before she departed for West Ashley. Dave, whom I knew from Henry's house in the past, didn't quite transition from being a drinking buddy to an old family friend. Maybe she was right. Tammy flew to Vancouver a week after our talk. We had dinner the night before her departure, but our situation remained unchanged. We were unofficially giving each other space. I didn't make demands, and she didn't offer anything either. I think that last point raised the most concern. We both enjoyed the bed life when we were together. Our professional separations of up to 10 weeks always seemed to ignite our passion upon reunion. We'd spend the weekend wrapped up in each other, only surfacing for food and drink, consumed by our desires. Could I go 6 months without that? Certainly. But would I even want to, knowing my estranged wife was off on her own cosmopolitan adventure? Much would hinge on the decisions we made in the weeks and months ahead. We would either end as a couple or find a way back to each other. I arrived at DFW the night before and waited until morning to drive to where Dave's sentencing, as I jokingly called it when congratulating my old friend, was taking place. The drive up Route 75 was straightforward, and crossing the Red River into Oklahoma allowed me to check off another state on my list of places visited or passed through. Max, come over here. I want you to meet some great people, Dave said with a wide grin, standing beside his new wife. I followed them to a gathering by the dockside where I had already met most of the attendees at the wedding. So this is the captain? An intriguing young woman asked in a casual tone. Max, meet Winona Gustafson. Dave introduced me to his new and old in-laws, including a charming woman named Susan, whom I had previously encountered in Charleston. Surprisingly, his ex-wife Tracy, who was now the sister of his new wife, was also there with her new partner. I had expected tension, but it seemed they had reconciled. Somehow, I ended up spending the evening with Winona, despite being aware of our age difference. It didn't seem to matter. She even taught me how to two-step before the night was over, and we had a great time. I could joke and say things went further, but I behaved as a perfect gentleman, and we parted ways as enjoyable company and nothing more. I sensed she might have considered adding a sea captain to her conquests, But I had Tammy on my mind, and it didn't feel right to me. Still, it was a tempting thought, if that's what it was. The happy couple departed for their honeymoon while I headed south towards the Texas Hill Country and down to San Antonio for a few days. I had visited the city years ago, but never had the chance to return. With the help of a friend, I secured a 3-night stay at the historic Menger Hotel next to the Alamo downtown. This was the kind of adventure I had envisioned for Tammy and myself in retirement, exploring the country and visiting places like this. I sat at the venerable bar of the Menger, listening to tales of Teddy Roosevelt riding his horse right up to the bar, along with countless other stories from the barkeep, undoubtedly rehearsed 1,000 times. Before the night ended, I retired to my room, only to repeat the experience the following evening. Within a week, I was preparing for another journey, weighed down by the uncertainties of my marriage and decisions that eluded me. Nearly 6 months later, after almost half a year had passed, our eastward journey lasted 14 days before we approached the illuminated gantry cranes lining the riverside quay at Bremerhaven. The voyage was mostly tranquil, save for a brief stop at sea for engineers to swiftly repair a section of the main shaft. The Molly Sen would remain in port for 6 days during this layover, awaiting the final third of a parts order for Borg-Warner to arrive dockside before we could set sail again. With an additional 3 days at hand, I granted most of the crew leave to enjoy some well-deserved time off. I didn't need to speculate on their activities. I knew they would likely find solace in the bottom of a few empty mugs and the company of local women. A few might end up in the ship's infirmary mid-voyage, but that was their business with Doc. "Captain Bunyan, would you care to join me for dinner this evening?" asked the tall, distinguished gentleman after we had completed our customs review. Dennis Toller held numerous roles, chiefly as director of Bremerhaven port operations. When the most influential figure in the port invites you to dinner, you accept. Our destination that evening was the Suta Deern, where we were joined by his daughter, Kirsten, a dark-eyed beauty in her 40s. "Max, do you ever take passengers on your crossings?" Kirsten inquired. "I had a pair of young college students take a transatlantic passage last summer from New York to Southampton. They imagined it would be a grand adventure, though I suspect it grew rather tedious after the first few days. We lack elegant staterooms and nightly entertainment unless you count the crew's poker games as entertainment." The sparkle in her eye revealed her adventurous nature, and I sensed she would find her own amusement if needed. I used to fly to New York regularly with my ex-husband, and I remember peering down, hoping to spot ships on the water, but I never could. I suppose we were too high. I've always wanted to take that journey solely for the adventure. I knew she would attract attention aboard the ship. I could see her chest rising and falling with each excited recounting. A woman as voluptuous and beautiful as her could easily distract a crew of 15 souls at sea, but she struck me as capable of handling the spotlight. "Well, Ms. Kirsten, if you ever decide to spend 12 days or more crossing the cold Atlantic, let me know, and we'll arrange a stateroom for you. We might have a few boxes cluttering the space, but give me some notice and we'll make it cozy." I chuckled. Director Toller laughed and jokingly warned that I might regret extending such an invitation. The Molly Sen was refueled, bulkheads secured, and the harbor master guided us out of port. With 6,250 containers below deck and on deck, my engineer increased the propeller speed and steered us into the North Sea. When we set sail, a winter storm was moving away from the northeast coast of the U.S., headed towards Iceland. Despite this, our headquarters authorized us to proceed. By the time we reached the English Channel near Guernsey, the storm had veered eastward, directly into our planned northern route across the Atlantic. A weather front had formed north of Greenland, pushing southward, complicating forecasts of the storm's eastward movement. Headquarters intervened, deciding we would dock in Portsmouth and resume once conditions improved. Across from me sat Roger Chaffee with a fresh round of ales and shots of whiskey brought by the barmaid. I first met Roger when I was a first mate, and he was first officer on a Maersk container ship departing from Southampton in 2002. His first wife had left him a few years prior, and he had since gained a reputation as a ladies' man. I'll never forget the surprise on his face when I declined to join in the pleasures of two American college co-eds on their English summer escapade. Both were eager for a night of revelry, and had singled us out for the experience. I flashed my wedding ring at him. He just grinned, his hand firmly on the ample breast of the girl in his lap. "Jesus, mate, are you sure?" I was certain. Thoughts of Tammy overshadowed any physical pleasure I might have found in the affair. But it didn't matter. Roger whisked both girls upstairs, one on each arm, and I didn't see him until the following afternoon. He couldn't wipe the grin off his face all the way to the docks if he tried. "So, is she gone for good?" he asked me. I had recounted the story of her return journey and my discoveries, her last 6 months in Vancouver. I may have glossed over the pain, but it was written all over my face. "I don't know, Roger. We talk briefly every week or so, as we agreed from the start. But since she left, I haven't seen her," I replied. "Do you want her back?" There it was, the million-dollar question. Back at our kitchen table on Anson Street, I would have immediately said yes, I want her back. And part of me still does. But at what cost? She's had 6 months to be with whomever she pleased, and who's to say there weren't any? As for me, there have been none. I couldn't be certain about her past, just as I wasn't then. "That's a tough question, buddy. Ask me after she's back in Charleston, if she comes back at all." We lingered longer, enjoying the beer and the intimate atmosphere of the sparse crowd. A couple of middle-aged women engaged us in light conversation, though any potential pursuit was curbed by the emotional baggage we both carried. Roger was in a serious relationship with a woman, having largely settled down and reserved his energy for the woman he planned to marry. She was a robust Englishwoman from the north, possessing a handsomeness in her own feminine way. If a seafaring man could define love, she embodied it for him. As for myself, I had charm and a vivid imagination, though I must confess, temptations were ever present. I delayed acting on them, holding on to hope for reconciliation. The following morning, heavy rain lashed the bridge as I relieved my second officer on watch. The storm had moved eastward, winds gaining strength in the channel. By mid-morning, dock workers had ceased operations, gantry cranes standing idle. "We're expecting a fare-paying passenger, sir," my steward informed me once the crew had secured additional tie-downs. "She'll board once the storm clears and we're cleared for departure." The news was unwelcome given the circumstances. I doubted the ship's galley was prepared for an additional passenger, necessitating clearance of an extra stateroom. "She? Where did she come from?" I queried, recalling discussions from previous dinners. "Exeter, sir." The steward continued with the preparations for the passenger, and I resumed my duties as the storm raged on for the next few hours. By early evening, we were in line to depart, aiming for an early morning departure. "Ms. Seaver, our passenger, has boarded, sir," the steward reported. "The first mate has escorted her to her quarters. Should I arrange a captain's table for 9 p.m.? "Please do. Set it up in the conference room near my cabin and have both the first and second officers present," I replied. "It's our custom, regardless of whether the passenger pays or not, to conduct a meeting soon after boarding but before departure. This includes reviewing regulations, expectations, and a safety orientation. Given the hazardous nature of a container ship, the safety and well-being of all crew and passengers are top priorities." "Yes, sir," the steward acknowledged before carrying out the instructions. With custom and tradition in mind, I changed into my formal attire and adjusted my captain's cap before entering the conference room. "Why, Captain Max? What a striking presence you make," she greeted me enthusiastically, her voice filling the room. "Ms. Seaver?" I responded, momentarily surprised. "That's my former husband's name. Tuller Seaver, actually. I never changed it back after the divorce." It was clear Kirsten Tuller Seaver had already charmed my officers before my arrival, as both were struggling to contain their smiles. They had completed the safety briefing and outlined the restricted areas aboard the ship where she was not permitted to go. Now it was my turn to assume the role of the ship's master. "So, Kirsten, what brought you on this journey? We're quite a ways from Bremerhaven." "Oh, it's quite a tale, Max. I convinced Papa that I was serious about taking a voyage, and by the time I made up my mind, you had already departed. Then I heard about the storm, and Papa told me you had docked here. The only airport I could fly into was Exeter, and now here I am." I called the head office after I had already left, so there was no stopping me. Initially, they were hesitant, but once I mentioned Papa, they relented, especially when I assured them I could arrive 12 hours before departure. I discreetly coughed to signal my disapproval to my officers, who were clearly amused by Ms. Kirsten's informality. "I understand your journey must have been challenging, ma'am, especially with the storm. I trust our accommodations here will meet your needs. Had I known you were coming, I would have—" "Oh, Max. It's perfect just the way it is. I wouldn't want it any other way, honestly." I couldn't resist her smile, and we continued with light conversation at the table before excusing ourselves, leaving our guest to retire to her quarters. "Captain, I'm sure the crew will be delighted," remarked my first officer with a grin stretching across his face. "No doubt they will be," I thought to myself as I ascended the steps to the bridge. Several hours later, Roger Chaffee guided us out of port with his usual flair, giving a wink upon spotting Ms. Kirsten on the observation deck. The sight of a woman always caught his attention. "Until next time, old friend," he said, heading off to the skiff on the starboard side. The crew of the Molly Sen numbered 9, all hailing from Portugal. They had been together for several voyages, with occasional replacements as crew members moved on to other ships or pursuits. While tales of sailors from distant lands are sometimes plentiful and true, most container ship crews tend to share the same nationality. Shared language and customs make for a smoother journey in the long run. A couple of experienced Portuguese sailors from earlier times effectively managed the crew, although their rigor was rarely required. Most of their pent-up energy found an outlet on shore. In addition, the round-the-clock 12-hour shifts for 10 weeks left little time for pranks. However, when Miss Kirsten was on board, I made sure that my staff were on the lookout. "Max, it's just amazing here. Is it always like this here?" Miss Kirsten asked me a few evenings after the start of the trip, standing on the observation deck. "The only light source for miles around is up there, unless the deck lights are on." That evening, the sky was decorated with a crescent moon, and millions of stars against the black horizon set the tone for our journey. I felt her hand gently rest on my lower back. I was completely set up for a pleasant evening. Maybe it was the smell of her, or maybe it was just the 6-month absence of a woman. Whatever the reason, I had a desire for this woman, like a 20-year-old sailor on his first cruise along the coast of Maine. Fortunately, or unfortunately, there was a radio broadcast from the bridge demanding my immediate attention to the problem, and I apologized, feeling her gaze on the back of my head, or so it seemed to me. Later that night, in the privacy of my cabin, I let my thoughts take over, imagining the delightful moments with her lying on the bunk beneath me. Meals for my crew were served in the mess room, designed for 6 people. Since there were always 2 people at the table, the 4 of us usually dined together. Together with our guest, Kirsten took a place at the buffet next to the captain. This allowed her to sit next to me at every table, where she was often the center of attention. None of us seemed to mind. My second mate was clearly fascinated by her from the moment he saw her. So much so that my first mate good-naturedly teased him when he thought I wasn't listening to him, calling him a second puppy. It was all in the spirit of friendly fun, so I didn't say anything. A few nights later, under the same dazzling array of stars and moonlight, Miss Kirsten and I found ourselves once again on the observation bridge, enjoying each other's company and discussing social lives in general. "Max, you and your estranged wife never had children?" she asked, gazing out at the dark sea ahead. No, we both chose lives of adventure, I suppose. Mine out here, hers in the world of academia. Besides, she couldn't, and we felt adoption wouldn't be fair to a child, given my frequent absences and her career ambitions. How about you? Any young Kirsten out there? She paused for a moment and took my arm. Yes, I have a daughter. She's all grown now, or at least she thinks she is. 20 years old, and away at university in Würzburg. A very independent spirit, studying physics and various other things that completely baffle me. Her name is Marlene, after her great-grandma, Papa's mother. We shared a quiet moment as she smiled at the mention of her child. Max, do you mind? She asked, pulling a small flask from her jacket. Of course not, I replied. Passengers were permitted to have their own alcohol as long as it remained on their person and wasn't excessive. I kept a small bottle of cognac in my cabin for special occasions, though officially it didn't exist. She took a small sip and offered it to me, but I declined. Duty and all, I confirmed. After our evening together, we parted ways, and I returned to the bridge for final reports before retiring for the night. I returned to my cabin around 11 p.m., read for a bit, and fell asleep, setting my alarm for 5 a.m. People say that as you get older, you tend to wake more during the night. That's never been an issue for me. Once I'm asleep, I typically don't wake for 5 to 6 hours unless the alarm sounds. At 2:34 a.m., an alarming sound pierced the air. It wasn't my alarm clock, but a man's voice in agonizing pain. I jumped up, grabbed my coat, and rushed out, only to see the officer on duty hurrying past my cabin towards Ms. Kirsten's room. Outside, chaos ensued near Ms. Kirsten's open door. A man lay on the floor, pants around his ankles, the officer restraining him. What the hell is happening here? I shouted amid the confusion. The crewman was bleeding heavily from his groin, while Kirsten, in a torn nightgown, stood nearby with a large knitting needle in her hand, barely covered. I quickly fetched her robe from the door hook and handed it to her. He was climbing into my bed, and I panicked. My needlework bag was next to me, and I just grabbed what I could, Kirsten explained tearfully, the shock wearing off. I comforted her and guided her to my cabin. Kirsten, please make yourself comfortable here while I sort this out. I gave her a box of tissues and indicated the small fridge if she wanted something to drink. Upon my return, my team and both Portuguese supervisors were present. There was a significant blood stain on the bed, and our first mate, who also served as our onboard medic, was attending to the perpetrator. As we pieced together the events, it became evident what had occurred. The Portuguese crew member had been working on deck, securing rigging during the voyage, and had improvised a tool to access Kirsten's stateroom. These rooms are secured with a sliding rectangular bolt that he managed to manipulate using the improvised Slim Jim he had made. Crew members are restricted from going above the third rail on D-deck of the bridge castle unless officially summoned. The perpetrator had scaled the railings to reach the stateroom and gain entry. I'm sure he regretted taking this trip at all. After receiving medical attention and soon finding himself trapped in the hold, Kirsten's knitting needle turned out to be a cruel weapon. I think such wounds can be cured, but until we get to the port, he will have to make do with bandages and painkillers. In the meantime, his food will consist of pita bread, beans, and water in the hold. The doctor examined Kirsten for injuries but found nothing, and by breakfast time none of us could sleep anymore. I instructed my engineer to install padlocks on the cabins until we figure out the locking mechanisms. What's going to happen to that scoundrel we saw last night? She asked me when we were talking on the observation bridge a few days later. It was an interesting question. While in international waters, the Molly Sen operates under Panamanian maritime law, and the offender would be extradited upon docking. However, I knew from experience that the process was more complex than expected. Ms. Kirsten, my staff, and I would need to provide testimonies upon docking, which would then be sent to the Panamanian consulate in Tampa. Panama would likely instruct the U.S. to deport him to Portugal. What I really wanted to do was throw him overboard, I joked. Chances are he'll end up deported back to his home country. He'll lose the right to dock in the U.S. and Europe. But more importantly, how are you holding up? She squeezed my arm and smiled. I'm all right now, although the first couple of nights were unsettling, especially after the adrenaline wore off. My dad taught my sister and me how to fend for ourselves when we were young, so this wasn't my first time. I broke a guy's arm back in university, although this one was a bit bigger. Seriously, I'm doing fine. How about the guy's injuries? Well, there was that too. The doctor did what he could for the man's wounds, but the knitting needle had caused serious damage. With the bleeding controlled and bandaged, he could receive proper medical care once we reached port, which was still 4 days away. Until then, he got fresh bandages and 30 minutes of fresh air daily. I doubt anyone on board, including his Portuguese crewmates, felt any sympathy for him. The following 4 days passed without incident, although most of my free time was spent with Kirsten. By the time we reached the shipping channel outside Charleston Harbor, I felt she knew almost everything about me, except for certain personal preferences that weren't appropriate for discussion with a lady. We docked past the battery where the harbor master greeted us with 2 tugs to guide us to the Wando Welch terminal on the Mount Pleasant side of the river. Passing East Bay, I signaled Satch with 2 short and a long whistle blast, indicating my readiness to leave the ship. I hadn't contacted Tammy, so I wasn't sure if she heard it or not. After clearing customs and finishing the necessary paperwork, DHS officers boarded the ship and took custody of the crewmen from the hold. I handed over command to my engineer before departing. Captain, come on. My wife and I will drop you off downtown. My first officer had already taken Kirsten's luggage and was heading to his wife's vehicle. Kirsten was staying at the Spectator Hotel on State Street near Market Square for a few days before heading to Washington, D.C., and then on to NYC. She planned to fly home from there. When we dropped her off, a bellhop took care of her bags, and she gave me a lingering hug, reminiscent of our time on deck that night a few evenings back. Max, once you've taken care of your personal matters, remember you promised to show me around the Holy City, she reminded me with a quick kiss. With that, I headed home and had them drop me off at the house. No white roses this time. Everything looked pretty much the same as it did 10 weeks earlier. I unlatched the iron gate, chiding myself for not completing the weld repair, and strolled across the courtyard to the back door of my house. Inside, everything was just as quiet as when I had left weeks ago. Aside from a few signs that the new tenants had settled in shortly before my departure, nothing had changed. When Tammy left for Vancouver, I decided to rent out another room to a second student, a family friend of the girl already staying with us. Both were quiet and meticulous, often so discreet that I wasn't sure if they were home. Sorting through messages by the phone stand amidst junk mail, I found business letters forwarded by Tammy and a note from Mrs. Sophie Pryor. Mr. Bunyan, please call me when you get back into town. Ms. Pryor. I set the note aside, dropped off laundry in the utility room, and headed upstairs for a shower and change of clothes, looking forward to a quick meal at Henry's, perhaps accompanied by a pint or two. I heard your old car pulling in earlier, Max, Satch remarked, sliding a cold IPA across the bar. Last time we spoke, you were considering moving to the retirement home. I had just turned 52 a few months earlier, and Satch never let me forget it, despite being only a year younger himself. But age was just a number to me. I felt healthy as a horse, still virile with just a hint of gray at my temples and all my teeth intact. I was joking about opening a hostel for young college co-eds, 3 to a room, especially since I already had 2 living in my pastel house. Satch chuckled at the idea. A college kid overheard and asked if I was serious, looking for a spot for the summer session. I gave her my business card with the numbers of my current tenants and told her they could help her out. Satch and I couldn't help but laugh at the situation. Not bad for an old guy on the brink of retirement. A couple of days later, I remembered Sophie Pryor's brief note and decided to give her a call. "Max, thank you for returning my call. I know you're busy, and with everything going on, I wasn't sure you'd want to talk." Sophie answered on the second ring. "Sophie, I always have time to talk to you, you know that. Can I assume this is about your husband and my wife?" I asked directly. "I suppose it is. Thomas has been fooling around for years now. I just didn't expect Tammy to fall for him like that. I would have called you earlier, but every time I was back at the Battery, you were out at sea again. This time I left a note with that sweet girl staying in one of your rooms. She was so kind. Yes, both of them are wonderful young ladies. Well, yes, they are. Now, as for Thomas, I've cut him off and thrown him out of the house here in Charleston, and he left with a black eye to match his black travel bag." She chuckled. "He was staying at the condo we have on King Street, although it seems he's spending as much time in Vancouver as he is here. Academic conferences, his secretary claims." "Nonsense," I say. "I thought you should know since Tammy has been in Vancouver for the past 6 months, according to her staff. I really don't know what she could possibly have seen in him. That said, Max, she called me about a month ago and asked if I had any influence over Thomas, after apologizing profusely through a hurricane of tears. It seems she has tired of his stalking behavior, and he wouldn't leave on his own. I got the impression he tried to stay with her a few times and she refused. I know that doesn't excuse her for setting up house with Jim Dahlberg for a few months out there, but at least she's come to her senses about Thomas. I've handled him on my end." As soon as the words left her mouth, my heart sank, and I kicked myself for not realizing it sooner. Jim Dahlberg is a visiting professor of humanities from Kingston University in Ontario with old ties to Vancouver. We've had dinner with him a few times over the past couple of years, even inviting him to the house occasionally. Dahlberg being involved with Tammy made much more sense, attraction-wise, than that toad Thomas. Maybe the long pregnant pause raised Sophie's concern. "Max, you didn't know about Jim?" "No, Sophie, this is news to me." "Oh dear, I thought all of this was out in the open since Tammy went to Vancouver. Do you know how long it has been going on?" "Max, I don't really know. You know, people talk and all. I've heard rumors going back to last year. All I know is that it was still happening when she called me, or at least she was staying in the same apartment. I checked with the university for contact information for both her and Jim, and it's the same. Sophie, thank you for telling me this. Seriously, this is very important for me to know with everything else that's going on." I promised Sophie to stay in touch and ended the call. "Sophie, you are a sly old bird, throwing her under the bus like that," I mumbled to myself. In addition to the revelation about Tammy and Dahlberg, I also discovered that Thomas Pryor was essentially a kept man, as he didn't own any of the assets he and Sophie enjoyed, and he had no claim on her wealth or properties since she had inherited most of it before they were married. They lived on Battery Row, the most prestigious address in the city. She also owned the condo on King Street and told me she had decided to remove his things and change the locks in his absence. Poor toad. 6 months of separation had just been confirmed, and although I should have been furious at the discovery, I was surprisingly calm. Yes, I was incredibly angry at this deception, but it no longer seemed strange. In terms of adultery, it made sense. Since Jim Dahlberg was an easy target for any serious female fan. Thomas was just a damn toad, there's no other way to describe him, and I still couldn't figure it out. There had to be something else in this story. Anyway, I looked at the ring on my finger and after a moment's hesitation took it off and put it in the candy bowl on the mantelpiece. "Well, hello, my sailor captain," she said when I picked up the phone. I hadn't thought much about Kirsten since my friend and I dropped her off at the Spectator when we arrived at the port. Just the sound of her voice filled my mind with her. "Good day to you too, Miss Kirsten." "Max, how have you been doing at home since you returned?" I must say, almost nothing has changed. I'm doing it alone again, I replied, without going into details. She froze for a moment and then made her move. I need a dinner companion, Max. I hope you'll be kind enough to spend the evening with me. I've booked a table for 2 at the Oak. He was highly recommended to me, and maybe after that we could walk down the street, since the evening is so wonderful. It's much nicer here than in snowy Bremerhaven. She resolutely took hold of the fishing rod and pulled me in. You can pick me up in the lobby downstairs at 7 p.m. I don't know if I agreed at all, but when we finished talking, I found myself rummaging through the closet upstairs in search of a tweed tuxedo that I liked, and heading for the shower. If Tammy was a thought, it was clouded by distance and visions of Jim Dahlberg, with whom she spent every night while I was gone. I know I wasn't thinking quite the way I probably should have, but the charm, though not as strong, was certainly intoxicating enough for dinner and a walk. I packed up and headed down Anson Street, bouncing slightly on the spot. At 6:55, I was at the bar of the Spectator, swirling bourbon in a glass, waiting for Ms. Toller-Seaver. When I looked up, she was standing there, truly breathtaking. She was wearing a dark blue dress with a plunging neckline, which generously emphasized her figure. Her dark red lipstick and smoky eyes completed the look. I resisted the urge to adjust the tightness in my pants. Jesus, I whispered under my breath. She just smiled and greeted me with a European embrace, her lips moist on each cheek. Miss Kirsten, you look stunning as always. Captain Bunyan, you have a way with words. What woman would tire of being called stunning? Once I finished my bourbon, Kirsten draped a wrap over her shoulders and we hailed a pedicab out front for the ride over to Broad Street and the Oak. We arrived and the maitre d' led us to our reserved seats in a cozy alcove on the second floor. And how is Mrs. Bunyan? She asked over dessert. I hadn't mentioned anything about my discoveries a few days ago, but we were comfortable enough with each other for me to say it was probably the final nail in the coffin regarding her current living situation. No hope of reconciliation? She asked with deadpan seriousness. I don't see how it could ever be possible. It was as if a spark lit up her eyes. Is that why you're not wearing your ring? I had actually completely forgotten about it, but she was right. Tammy and I were done. Let me settle up and let's take a stroll around town, I suggested. We walked out onto Broad Street and Kirsten slipped off her heels and put on a pair of slip-on canvas shoes before she took my arm in hers. We strolled through the maze of antique shops and galleries. It was a cool early March evening, just comfortable enough for her wrap and my tweed. After about an hour, I hailed another pedicab and we were swiftly taken to Henry's house for another drink. Honestly, I wanted to show off Kirsten to Satch, just to rub it in a bit. You know my usual, and a white wine for my date, I told the bartender with a chuckle. Since it was a weeknight, the crowd wasn't as thick as it would be on the weekend. It's good to see that Max here finally realized he needs a chaperone, Satch said with a smile, mouthing, Tammy? To me when Kirsten wasn't looking. I just shook my head slightly. Kirsten smiled and held my arm tighter, which amused Satch even more. She was like honey attracting bees. The regulars all made their way over at some point just to check her out. It might have been a bit bad of me to take her to Henry's, but I didn't care. We were having a good time, and it was my comfort zone. We both had a bit too much to drink and our inhibitions dropped as we continued to make amorous eye contact. I glanced at my bare finger a few times, wondering, but any concerns were pushed aside by thoughts of Jim Dahlberg. My place? I asked. Yes. Please. Let's go, she replied hastily. The house was quiet when I turned the bolt and we entered the living room. 2 students lived on the 3rd floor, and I rarely saw them in the evenings, which was probably for the best. Since I didn't mention them to Kirsten, my mind was clouded by desire. Max, she whispered, I want you. She looked at the stairs and lowered one strap of her dress to her elbow, then looked back into my eyes with her gaze. Pulling on the remaining strap, the blue dress slipped from her waist and then to her ankles as she stepped over it, leaving it on the floor. Standing in front of me, Kirsten turned and slowly moved up the steps, moving slowly to achieve maximum effect. I followed her without taking my eyes off her, knowing what pleasures awaited me. "Right," I muttered, my voice barely audible as she reached the top of the stairs and lifted the piece of paper over her head, letting it fall to the floor at the foot of the stairs to the third floor. "Adultery, Dahlberg, fraud, Dahlberg, Tammy. Damn," flashed through my mind as I scooped Kirsten up in my arms and carried her over the threshold, hugging her to me. I put her on my bed. "Do it all, Max," she breathed. And I just did it. "God, Kirsten, that was amazing," I whispered in her ear as we hugged. She buried her face in my chest. After alcohol, intimacy, and a late hour, we soon fell asleep on wet sheets, not caring about anything. In the late morning, I woke up and found Kirsten had already gotten up. I didn't hear her as I went to shower, and when I returned to the bedroom, she was still absent. I quickly dressed in scrubs and a t-shirt, then headed downstairs to the kitchen. "Well, good morning, Captain Max," Kirsten greeted cheerfully from the table where she sat with my two upstairs tenants. They both wore mischievous grins as they buttered their muffins. "The girls and I were just having a lovely chat after they kindly retrieved my, belongings this morning," Kirsten said, gesturing towards her clothes on an empty chair. "How thoughtful of them," I replied, trying to contain my own smile as I poured a fresh cup of coffee. The two girls excused themselves with giggles, and Kirsten adopted a slightly faux superior expression. "By the way, I forgot to mention that I rent out the top floor of the house," she added, making one of those faces women make when a man realizes he's made a small mistake. "That's all right. They seem like nice young ladies. I think one of them has a bit of a crush on you, Max." "Try not to break her heart too much," she teased, smiling. After enjoying breakfast and tidying up, I showed her around the market area. By lunchtime, we found a cozy spot at a courtyard cafe. "Max, what's your plan with your wife now? You mentioned it was over, but does she know?" It was a direct question, one I hadn't fully considered. There was Tammy, and then Thomas and Sophie, not forgetting Jim Dahlberg. I still couldn't shake the image of his betrayal. She lied to me instead of coming clean and putting it behind us. I don't see a way back now, especially not after this. It's not about what we did, Kirsten. It's about her actions, then and now. So she didn't end it? Apparently not. I stared out at the busy street. Even then, if Tammy had confessed and asked for forgiveness that rainy day in the kitchen, I would have forgiven her, let go of the Dahlberg affair. That's how much I loved her. I would never have turned to Kirsten, or even considered it. But that was all in the past now. I knew what I needed to do. Kirsten was leaving for D.C. the next day, then off to New York City for a couple of weeks. There was undeniable chemistry between us, and for a moment I almost disregarded everything to follow her. But there were unresolved matters that needed my attention. We capped off the day with a water taxi tour of the harbor and rivers, and I walked her back to the Spectator. "Are you sure you won't come up, Max?" We had discussed my tasks beforehand, so I declined the offer after a prolonged embrace and whispered assurances. With that, I turned back towards the market and an office on King Street. Upon landing, the weather was overcast and drizzly as I grabbed my luggage. The hotel shuttle bus transported me to my accommodation, where I settled in before heading to the bar. There, I absent-mindedly stirred my bourbon while a CBC drone droned on about some First Nation issue I was unfamiliar with. A lovely waitress offered a refill, but I politely declined as I had business to attend to. "West 10th next to the university, please," I instructed the driver who picked me up. I had checked the GPS location on her phone and knew she was there, or at least her electronic presence was. The cliched envelope sat on my lap as the driver navigated through the bustling streets, avoiding pedestrians along the way. We stopped in front of a 4-story renovated apartment building, and I looked at the top floor on the left, wondering if fate had put enough obstacles in my way. I almost decided to give up everything, tempted to drop the envelope in the nearest mailbox and go home. "Do you want me to wait, sir?" "What is it?" the polite driver asked, apparently reading my mind. "No. Go on. I'm not sure how long I'll be back." After the payment, I handed him his business card in case I needed to call back. I climbed the stairs until I reached the landing on the top floor, watching the neat entrance at the end of the corridor decorated with a couple of potted plants. The number 404A was elegantly printed on the door jamb in Old English numerals. I knocked on the door twice, still wearing my leather driving gloves. "Damn it, Pryor, you're a jerk," a man's voice shouted, getting louder as he approached the door. He opened it, and his expression changed from shock to disbelief when he saw me standing on the threshold. Max, I thought. Even at the age of 52, 30 years of practical work in engineering with catwalks, decking, and mechanisms did not soften me. With a quick left kick, I hit him below the ear, and Jim Dahlberg collapsed to the floor in the hallway of his apartment. Standing over him, I unzipped the zipper and poured the yellow liquid over his unconscious face. When I was done, I stepped over him and sat down in the living room, and Tammy finally hurried down the hall, still dripping from the shower I'd interrupted. She was wearing a short terry cloth robe. Under other circumstances, I might have liked it, but not today. She stood in the hallway and looked at me, unable or unwilling to speak. I nodded towards her lover, who was lying unconscious. "Have a seat, Tammy. We need to talk." I pointed to the couch and got up to close the front door, stepping over the man who had been sleeping with my wife for over a year. "Why didn't you just admit everything before, Tammy?" "Well, I guess there's no need to answer that question since you clearly weren't going to stop it," I said. Dahlberg stirred and Tammy rushed to him. "Max, that wasn't necessary. What were you thinking?" I looked at her in disbelief. "I've been thinking about all those times when he slept with you, cheating on you. In my bed, in his bed, anywhere," I replied. I dropped the yellow envelope on the coffee table and saw her eyes widen. "Max, it's not what you think." I interrupted her and walked down the hallway towards the apartment's only bedroom. Inside, I saw the rumpled bed sheets and scattered clothes, evidence of what had just happened. Dahlberg was sprawled on the couch, clearly dazed. "I've been fair, Tammy. We'll split half of our savings from the past 12 years since we got married. Our retirements are separate, so let's keep it that way. I had my house before you came into the picture, and you have your bungalow in West Ashley. Here's the simple part. Sign the papers, and I'll have your belongings sent across town." Tammy looked devastated, as if a disaster had just struck. Dahlberg sat there, looking stunned with a swollen jaw, a result of my punch connecting solidly. "Max, please let me come home so we can talk and try to work through this." I just shook my head. "Tammy, I almost fell in love with you the first time I saw you, and honestly, I'm still in love with you. But what you've done has shattered my trust completely. How could I ever trust you again? It could have been 30 men instead of 3. I'll never know, and at this point, it hardly matters. You've destroyed us, and I don't see a way to recover from this. You can't mean this, Max. You can't." I glanced at her, barely dressed in an unfamiliar apartment filled with the persistent smell of intimacy, then nodded in the direction of Jim Dahlberg and shook my head. "Jesus, H. Don't come back to the house, Tammy. There won't be anything left for you there. The girls will know when you're not welcome on Anson Street. Just sign the papers and continue living the life you've been living without me." I turned away before she could witness the tears in my eyes and left. As I reached the stairs, I glanced back to see her standing in the doorway, crying. I continued on, heading downtown, hoping to evade the local police who might mistake me for the troublemaker I had pretended to be. The next day's flight back to Charleston was long and quiet. The police never came to the hotel in Vancouver, leaving me with a restless mind and an uncertain future. Despite everything, despite my inexplicable attraction to Kirsten, I still loved Tammy. The 20-year relationship with my wife and lover had come to an abrupt end. As I reviewed the paperwork in front of me, there was still another pint in the growler. My 30-year milestone was approaching in 3 months, and if I kept going back out to sea, it would be for financial gain rather than pension growth. The medical benefits wouldn't improve at 80-20 coverage, so if I were practical, I'd retire and live as a gentleman in the city. But practicality wasn't everything. My love for the sea held greater sway, and I committed to another year with the company. "Max, I'm sorry to hear about you and Tammy. You two had quite a run," Satch said with genuine sympathy. He had been through it himself 3 times without success. "Yeah, it's all right. We'll both move forward and see what lies ahead." I lied. I wasn't okay with it. When I returned from Vancouver, I painstakingly packed all of Tammy's things and had them delivered to her sister's bungalow, just as I promised her. According to the handbook, sea captains don't cry. I remained strong and resolute until the moment I had to empty her drawers and pack up their contents, and then I couldn't hold back anymore. Those naive idiots who think burning the woman is some cathartic experience clearly haven't loved someone like her. They talk tough about exacting their revenge, but none of them ever faced the aftermath of their actions. Standing in that empty room, I sobbed uncontrollably, a towering 200-pound shell of a man reduced to tears. Afterward, I went to Henry's and drowned my sorrows. The alcohol lifted me from my despair, and soon I was back to mechanically moving forward, with another 2 weeks before my next voyage. The Molly Sen had resumed its journey, 3 days out of Charleston. I relaxed in my bunk, catching up on ship news and personal emails. Kirsten sent occasional messages, checking on my well-being. We had extensively discussed our confrontation over the phone one evening while she was in NYC. Moving on from one woman to another isn't simple. In fact, I'd call it impossible. Kirsten and I shared a magnetism we couldn't explain. She understood my heart still belonged to another woman. Whether intentionally or not, she gave me space, which only deepened my affection for her. Weeks passed without hearing from Tammy regarding the paperwork. After a brief stop in Rotterdam, we docked in Bremerhaven for a 3-day loading operation. With the crew granted 24 hours liberty, and the duty watch set, I ventured ashore for a personal mission of my own. The taxi halted in front of a 3-story stucco townhouse on Helgolander Strasse. As it drove off, I gazed up at the house. A face briefly appeared at the curtain, and as soon as I rang the bell, the door swung open wide before I even released my finger. "Max, I've been waiting," she murmured, then threw herself into my arms, burying her face against my throat. I was speechless in that moment, consumed by the intense longing and desire I felt for her. Her lips met mine, and we stood embracing in the foyer with the door ajar to the street beyond. "Please come in," she said, her voice husky with desire. Somehow we found our way to the living room. Then she guided me into her kitchen, where she poured 2 shots of cognac side by side. We raised our glasses in a toast to my long-awaited arrival. As we settled in, I took in the cozy furnishings adorned with European antiques, giving the home an air of old-fashioned comfort. Family photos adorned the mantel, including one of her strikingly beautiful daughter and another of Dennis Toller with Kirsten's late mother. My father lives with me and occupies the 3rd floor since my mother passed away 4 years ago. My sister Lydia stays on the 2nd floor when she's in town. But that's becoming less frequent since she found a new beau, she said with a somewhat coy smile. And of course there's Marlene and myself as well. We settled in for a while before heading out to dinner. And the more I admired her, the more I felt like a young man who had just discovered the love of his life. If I were indeed a young man, I might have believed it. But having lived a life seasoned by experience, I understood the complexities, as did Kirsten. Max, when my ex-husband left me, it took me a long time to agree to sign the papers, almost 2 years. He was patient despite having another woman in NYC who wanted to marry him. Out of spite, I slept with 3 men and a woman, mostly for revenge, although secretly I hoped he would return to me. He never did, and Lydia finally convinced me to sign. Then, incredibly, he wanted to come back. By then, I wanted nothing to do with him. He was a fool, I remarked seriously. Yes, just like your wife was for discarding you the way she did. Her divorce was a whole different story from mine. Both had let their marriages fall apart until they found comfort in others' arms, and blame was plentiful. If I had known the danger, I would have acted swiftly with Tammy. But hindsight is as useful as ignorance in such matters. Whether Tammy signed or not didn't matter. The courts would eventually decree it, and I had vowed not to rush into another relationship. Her eyes sparkled mischievously as she moved closer, sitting on my lap. "Let's dine in," she whispered in my ear. We spent a wonderful evening in bed. The slow ceiling fan above us kept turning as we lay there, sated and damp, momentarily speechless. "Max, where did you say you studied to become an engineer? Was it in Castine, in New England?" "Yes, at Maine Maritime Academy in Castine, Maine. It's a wonderful little place on the coast of Maine. I'll show it to you on a map when we get the chance." "I'd like more than just to see it on a map. I'd love to visit Maine. Papa says it's a lot like Norway, but with a much rockier and wilder coast. It sounds amazing. Maybe you could take me there someday." I nodded and smiled, both outwardly and inwardly. I couldn't imagine a better time than spending a vacation with her in a cottage in Downeast, Maine. When I was younger, I often thought about moving back to Castine or even to Vinalhaven. It was a romantic idea, not always practical, so I kept it at the back of my mind over the years. I have many fond memories of the place. It's wonderful in the summer, though it can be a bit bleak in the winter. Maybe during one of my off-rotations we can make the trip. Her eyes sparkled again. In the morning, Kirsten prepared a traditional German breakfast for me, tailored to my taste in the old-fashioned style. It was a simple open-faced dish with scrambled eggs and slices of ham on pumpernickel, accompanied by black coffee and pastries. "Is Dennis not here?" I asked, noticing his absence. "Oh no, he's in Hamburg for a conference." I felt somewhat relieved to learn that he wasn't around, as he was her father, and it would have been awkward. She just grinned, as if she could read my mind. "Where are you headed next?" she asked. "Unfortunately, we're waiting in line to go through the Suez Canal. Dad says the captains don't like it, most of them." He's right. We can end up staying in Port Said for a long time if we mess up. The good news is that in 5 weeks my service term in Bremerhaven ends. This gives me a 6-week vacation at the very start of summer. I could imagine what was going through her mind, but right now I had to finish my business and return to the ship. We said a long goodbye, and she accompanied me to the waterfront, where I relieved the officer of the watch. I watched as 4 men boarded the Molly Sen from the starboard gateway, each carrying black duffel bags and wearing gray stocking caps. They mostly kept to themselves, securing their gear in the bowhold and observing the deck conditions. They were PMSC riggers, hired guns from a private maritime security company. Several shipping companies were employing these security teams for trips through the Indian Ocean due to the Islamic pirates operating off the Gulf of Aden, through the Mozambique Channel, and even off the seaward side of Madagascar near Saint-Denis on Reunion. We were carrying cargo destined for Athens, South Africa, and Argentina. Otherwise, I would have avoided the Horn of Africa route at almost any cost. "Captain, Port Said has cleared us for direct entry to the canal once we pass Zakros," my first officer reported. This was good news for our timing. It meant most of the merchant traffic was behind us and we would enter the canal without delay. As we passed through Port Said, the riggers became much more active, taking up watch positions as we journeyed south. It wasn't just the Indian Ocean pirates that were a concern. Radical Islamists on both banks were a constant threat, although the Egyptian army maintained a firm control over most of the area. We reached the Red Sea without incident and continued south as we approached the coast of Somalia. The bridge watch alerted our riggers when a small trawler to port side launched a couple of outboards, each with crews of 5 or 6, possibly more if there were people in the bow. "Captain, we're taking fire," my second-in-command shouted. We could hear the rapid pings hitting the port side of the bridge before a couple of the riggers began firing at one of the approaching outboards. The crew had already moved off the deck to safety. Only I, the 5 officers, and the riggers were above deck. Then chaos erupted when a rocket flew past the bridge, narrowly missing the first stack of containers by 10 feet. "Jesus H. Christ! Take cover behind the partition," I yelled, instructing them to get behind a security wall we have on the bridge for such scenarios. It wasn't a safe room, but more of a deflective barrier. The riggers were returning heavy machine gun fire at the trawler with multiple bursts of .50 calibers. When the rocket flew past us, one of the riggers shouldered what I later learned was a Gustav M3 Maus and fired his rocket just before a second rocket from the trawler struck the portside stern, shaking us from stern to bow, though it wasn't a serious hit. The trawler, on the other hand, took a direct hit on one of its fuel tanks and exploded in a massive fireball. At that moment, all 4 riggers opened fire with everything they had on the 2 outboards, and moments later, both were engulfed in black smoke and flames. We watched the bandits jump from their boat into the warm waters, perhaps hoping that we would save them from certain death at sea, whether by drowning or becoming shark bait. The Molly Sen was racing ahead at 23 knots. There was no way I was going to slow down and circle back to pick up the fools who had just attacked us with the rockets and gunfire. We were in international waters, and while I reported to the Home Office, out here, I was the law. We were only obligated to inform the nearest friendly nautical authorities about what had happened. As long as we were still seaworthy, we weren't stopping for anyone until we reached Cape Town. "Captain, I've got 1 man with a superficial wound to his left arm, and it's being treated. 2 of my men have collected all the spent brass they could find. With your permission, we'll regroup and prepare for the rest of the voyage. We're not out of range yet." He was a young man, maybe in his early 30s, reminding me of an ex-Navy instructor I had back in school. He was right. We still had a long way to go. That was when the adrenaline started to wear off, and I needed to sit down. Anticipating such an event was one thing. Experiencing it was entirely different. That's when I decided enough was enough. 2 consecutive rotations with serious incidents. First with Kirsten, and now this bandits pirate attack. I figured I would let the Home Office know I was reconsidering how much longer I would continue this. Until then, I sat down with my first and second officers, poured 3 glasses of cognac, and raised a toast. "Here's to the high seas and another dollar earned, fellows." We toasted, tipped our glasses, and did it once more before I made a satellite call to the Home Office. 3 weeks later, we were navigating through the English Channel on our way to Bremerhaven. The PMSC riggers disembarked at Cape Town and flew to Indonesia for another assignment. We only sustained minimal damage to the stern rail and had 2 damaged containers. Overall, it was a fortunate outcome. However, my Portuguese crew didn't share the sentiment. One of the chiefs mentioned that he believed more than half the crew would quit once they reached shore. "They are not soldiers," he said. "Indeed, who is?" I thought to myself as I opened the email my attorney had sent a couple of days earlier. The plane landed at Charleston International, the second leg of a flight from Frankfurt to Maine through Dulles. I took an Uber to head down the peninsula. My old neighbor, Mr. Shields, had planted a new row of roses along his front windows, and they were in full bloom. "Your girls have been a great help, Mr. Bunyan. Nice girls, both of them," he said as I handed him the pastries he loved from Kaminsky's. "2 of the best," I replied with a smile as I turned toward the iron gate. The craftsman had repaired the latch, making everything solid again as I deadheaded some old blooms on my way to the back door. With a fresh cup of coffee in hand, I began reviewing the email and attached letter I had received from my attorney a few days earlier. Tammy still had not signed the papers, instead demanding what she called a second chance and a sit-down at our house. She had returned to Charleston a couple of weeks ago, seemingly over her several-month-long bout of infidelity. By the time I read through her empty words for the umpteenth time, anger was boiling up inside me, and I immediately dismissed any idea of meeting at the house. I couldn't envision any scenario that would help us move past her betrayals. And now, with my affair with Kirsten further complicating matters, it seemed absurd to even try. Nonetheless, I called my attorney to arrange the meeting on neutral ground. I wanted barbecue. So he set it up at Bessinger's, west of the Ashley. I filled a styrofoam container with generous portions of pulled pork, ribs, and sides before claiming one of the outdoor picnic tables. I asked a waitress to bring a pitcher of sweet tea. It might be an unpleasant meeting, but I was determined to eat like a Southern king. Tammy arrived a few minutes later with a much smaller portion. I had to admit, if this had been a date, her appearance would have tempted me. She wore a sundress with a couple of buttons undone that would normally be closed. The hem was quite high on her thigh, and with her muscular legs and firm chest, it was clear she was trying to attract her husband. She hadn't expected such a depth of imagination. Her imagination was picturing another man, Jim Dahlberg, a white mandingo. Suppressing a slight smile, I muttered with my mouth full of hash pappy. "Tammy, it's your turn." Without hesitation, she said, "I want to go home, Max," pausing to gauge my reaction. "I want to go home and try to get back what I foolishly and recklessly lost. I know it won't be easy, but I'm asking you to give me this chance." Without realizing it, she just longed to go back to that rainy day on Anson Street and start over. I didn't need any of it. I picked up a bottle of Carolina hot sauce and spread some on my fork. "Do you remember that Christmas party over a year ago? Do you remember how Jim Dahlberg always hung mistletoe on every woman's head, including yours? He was already up to his ears in your married bed, wasn't he? I was thinking about it the other day. This jerk was perfectly familiar with the toilet on the second floor and everything else, wasn't he? Have you been trying your best for a long time and you think that you just have a difficult path ahead of you?" I took a bite of my pork stew sandwich, savoring the taste as I waited for her response. This may sound tactless, but she has already broken my heart, and I have cried out all the tears I had. There were other things I needed to understand. I need to know about that damn toad, Thomas Pryor. How did he manage to get involved with you when you regularly meet with Dahlberg? Tammy looked like she was about to cry, but she pulled herself together. "Thomas was blackmailing me," she said softly. "One day he caught Jim and me together after work and threatened to tell you about us. He had a video on his phone." Oh my God, Max. I didn't want any of this. The relationship with Jim developed progressively, and then with Thomas. I made the mistake of going to Vancouver to escape. I didn't know Jim would follow me. I was weak around him. He has such an effect on women, I do not know why. I know why, Tammy. This is cheating on my wife. A year and a half of cheating. It started before Christmas, right? She didn't answer. Her expression spoke for itself. I already suspected blackmail because I couldn't imagine that Tammy would willingly choose someone like Thomas. I put that thought aside for later. "Tammy, I don't see how anything has changed since Vancouver. As far as I understand, this meeting was a waste of time." "Max, we have been together for more than 20 years. You can't just drop everything, go somewhere and have an affair, sleep with someone. I'll give you free rein even if I hate every moment of it. We just can't give up everything we have." She was crying and still didn't understand. I offered to let her go to Anson Street if she would be honest, and stop it. Instead, she betrayed me for another 6 months. That's when I told her about it. She understood how it hurt my pride. "You cuckolded me with your damn stallion. I was with him right in our bed." "Isn't this Dahlberg's cool mountain breeze? I bet you even put my pillow under you while you were intimate." Jesus Christ. She didn't deny anything. She just sat and cried, fully aware of the hopelessness of it all. "Tell me, Tammy, why did you even start dating him? You know the saying, curiosity killed the cat. What was said about him was true. He was as tough as a horse and twice as experienced. I thought I could handle this itch in just one go, but, as you can see. Damn it, Tammy. Over the years I could have slept with many attractive women, left one in each port, but I didn't do it." What she meant, but didn't say, was that after starting to get to know other men, she wanted to continue. I had no idea how many there were or would be in the future. The old saying that separation makes the heart tenderer now seemed meaningless. We exchanged glances, realizing that this was the end. I didn't feel hungry, only sad after 20 years of separation. Perhaps she hoped that I would be there when she sorted out her desires. Maybe she already understood. But I couldn't trust her anymore. I couldn't share any plans for the future with her, except that I knew I wouldn't be around her anymore. And that's where we stopped. She didn't know about Kirsten, and I saw no reason to tell her. My communication with Kirsten began after I took off my ring, knowing that it was over. "Maximilian's Golden IPA is on the table," he announced into the microphone. Satch sauntered over to us. "Did the fat lady sing her song?" I nodded and took a sip of beer. Not only did the fat lady sing, but the curtain came down. Tammy signed the papers and we settled our affairs, filing for divorce a few months later. Dahlberg moved to Toronto. There were rumors that he avoided Tammy as much as possible, but I tried to ignore it. Sophie Pryor divorced her husband and Thomas moved into a townhouse in North Charleston. Not at all at the address he dreamed of. Such, have you ever thought about giving up everything and going to that island you're always talking about? Dude, I think about it from time to time, but look at me. I have my own place. All these ladies come to me. I'm big, black, handsome, and my boys are here to play with me, he said, pointing to his saxophone in the corner and flashing his trademark smile. I'm going to do it someday, man. As we headed towards Anson Street, a light haze of rain hung in the air, and a mug was bought for regular customers. I rang the doorbell at the townhouse on Helgolander Strasse and soon heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal a young woman, a younger version of Kirsten herself. "You must be Marlene," I said, offering my hand. "Yes, Mr. Bunyan, Mama told me you'd be stopping by today. Please come in." "Please, call me Max." I followed her into the parlor, leaving my bag in the foyer as she invited me to make myself comfortable. Having hosted young women her age for over 25 years, I had grown accustomed to various types of beauty. Marlene, however, was in a league of her own. Any man who won the affection of this young woman should consider himself fortunate. "Mama said she'll be here in time for lunch." Marlene poured tea and sat opposite me. "She's been quite excited for days." Before long, Kirsten arrived home, followed by her father, Dennis. Kirsten rushed over to hug and kiss me, while Denise shook my hand. Lunch was pleasant, and afterward, Kirsten and I sat in the courtyard for a moment before packing our bags into her car. Marlene would drive us to Frankfurt am Main, then continue on to Würzburg. The next morning at 10 o'clock, we picked up a rental car and drove down to Castine on Penobscot Bay. Our flight had landed in Bangor, about an hour's drive away. Months ago, I had promised Kirsten a trip to down East Maine, and with the autumn colors around us and the mild weather, it was the perfect time. We had rented a cottage for a week and only needed to pick up some groceries and settle in, aside from one other matter. "Mr. Bunyan, may I call you Max?" asked the distinguished gentleman. "Of course, and I'll keep calling you Dean Gardner if that's all right with you." We had a laugh together when the dean of the Maine Maritime Academy took me into his office overlooking Castine Bay. The sequence of events leading up to this moment was quite random. I came across an old acquaintance from MMA who is now the captain of a cruise ship from Fort Lauderdale. He called, which led to another call, and eventually I got through to the dean, who contacted me. We have now finalized the details of the contract under which I will teach engineering as an adjunct professor at the academy. After sealing the agreement, with a handshake, I was soon on my way to a rented cottage near the Dicehead Lighthouse. "You got the job, didn't you?" Kirsten exclaimed when she saw my enthusiastic expression. "Of course I got it. You've never doubted that, have you?" I answered, picking her up in my arms and carrying her to a comfortable bed. "I want to celebrate by making love to you. Let me please you first. Then please me." So we did, after spending the rest of the day, and then we gathered for a lobster dinner at a quaint roadside shack not far from us. Kirsten was familiar with lobsters, but this was the first time she had tasted all these dishes: potatoes, corn, and steamed clams, as well as hefty 2-pound lobsters. The next day we had to make a decision, where to live and for how long. I still had my own apartment on Anson Street, and she had her own place in the family home in Bremerhaven. Now that I work part-time in Castine, we were sitting near Dicehead, looking across the bay towards Aylesborough, and Kirsten suggested, "Why not there?" "Well, the ferry only goes to the other side of the bay, not here. I would have to take the ferry to Lincolnville and then drive for over an hour to Castine. I would need my own boat to get here." "You're the captain, Max. It seems simple, doesn't it?" She gave me one of those looks that women give when they can't believe men are confused about certain things. Later that evening, I searched the internet for used boats and found a pair that fit all the parameters, especially one, a former lobster boat converted into a cozy pleasure boat for an elderly couple on Vinalhaven. It was equipped with a newly refurbished Cummins diesel engine, designed for only 200 hours of operation. After a few days and $20,000 lighter, he became mine. Meanwhile, Kirsten found us a house, a white clapboard cottage overlooking Castine and a short walk from the pier, where I could buy a ticket at a reasonable price. It wasn't cheap, but it came with a garden and a tavern about a mile to the south. I made a deposit, and the owner allowed us to rent the apartment until the deal is finalized. Thus, we became the official residents of Aylesborough. "God, Max, do this to me," she whispered later with genuine sincerity. I couldn't help laughing because she was the only sailor girl I had, and she was thrilled when I called her that. It set the tone for the rest of the time we spent together. I had a 6-week pipe-fitting class for freshmen, and I watched the work on the MMA TS State of Maine training ship in the port. I had to finish before Thanksgiving and the holidays, so Kirsten and I planned to visit Charleston before returning to Germany. Anson Street was filled with tourists and students who were visiting the shops and establishments when we returned from the market. Such recommended a friend to take care of property issues while I was away, and the girls living there were reliable. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, feeling like I had never been away. I had given the girls permission to use the downstairs however they liked, as long as they kept it tidy. They had done a good job, except for a lone pair of lavender and pink panties left on the bottom step. A likely laundry drop, I thought, winking at Kirsten. After a long day of travel, we ordered Chinese takeout and shared a bottle of wine before calling it a night with a slow, intimate moment in bed. In the morning, only one of the girls was still at home. The other 3 had gone home for the holiday. We invited her to join us for Thanksgiving at Carolyn's, a trendy restaurant off East Bay, along with Satch and a few other old friends. Everyone had a fantastic time, and after inviting some of them back to the house, Satch and I relaxed on the front steps with a good cigar and a bottle of top-shelf bourbon. "Hey, I've been keeping an ear out for you, you know. Did you hear about your ex stirring up trouble at the college?" She accused her boss of harassment, and then a couple more teachers came forward with similar statements. It made the news. Looks like he's in serious trouble, and people are saying he might resign or get fired. "That damn Pryor," I chuckled as the smooth bourbon touched my lips. "Yeah, well, your ex isn't doing much better either. She's been on a drinking binge for months since you two split. Came by my place a week ago, drunk as a skunk, asking about you. Left a few hours later with some other guy. That's always been her issue, Satch. She's into new things too much. Surprised she hasn't hit on you too." He gave me a strange look, and then it hit me. She has, hasn't she? Good Lord, I laughed. Did you go for it? Nah, man, you and I go way back for that. She's all right and all, and if she was someone else's problem, I might have jumped in right away, but she's baggage. As long as you're both alive, she's still your wife, even if you're divorced. So, what about that lovely woman you're seeing now, Kirsten? You two tying the knot or what? Perhaps it was the bourbon or the nostalgic musings drifting in the curls of cigar smoke around us. If Kirsten and I were both in a place to commit, maybe I'd marry her. But right now, neither of us was headed down that road. We were divorced adults relishing our current lives, finding joy in the moment. Why mess that up? Maybe someday, Satch, I replied. But for now, I'm enjoying the adventure here in Maine and even across Europe. Things are good as they are. We'll see. Someday, Tammy might settle down if given the chance. He mused. Yeah, maybe. I nodded, masking a deeper sadness. Tammy and I had already said everything that needed saying months ago, but her current path troubled me. Love wasn't something I saw as easily replaced. I'd spent too many years alone to view it as a commodity. It had been ages since I drove out to the bungalow by the Ashley River marshes. I think the last time was when Tammy was planning renovations before her sister moved in, after her marriage fell apart. Now the sisters were living together. I stood at the door for a moment after ringing the bell, waiting, until Patty appeared from around the side of the house with a toddler in her arms. That was unexpected. Hi, Max. If you're looking for Tammy, she's not here. That's all right. Actually, I was hoping to have a chat with you. Hey, I don't want to get involved in whatever happened between you two, she said, her voice trailing off. I interrupted gently. It's not about that. She's your sister, and I have some concerns based on what I've heard. Patty glanced away, nervously biting her lip. I've heard she's been struggling lately, and I'd like to offer my help, if possible. She gestured for me to follow her around to the back patio and offered me sweet tea. She knows you've moved on, Max, and I think that's what triggered everything. I don't know what to do. She's been going out drinking every night and bringing guys back here until I put my foot down, especially with the baby around. Well, I want her to take some action, and that means cutting back on drinking. I think she should take on a role as a house mom for the girls in the house. I currently have 4 of them renting rooms, and I'm considering adding 2 more. But I need someone reliable to oversee things and check in on them. I thought you already had someone looking after the place, Patty asked with a puzzled expression. I do, or at least someone to handle bills and maintenance issues. But with 6 students living there, it would benefit them to have a maternal figure to look out for them from time to time. I observed Patty contemplating deeply. We both understood that Tammy wasn't grappling with alcoholism. Rather, this was her temporary reliance. I'd address the consequences later, when the time was right. What's the boy's name? I inquired. Initially flustered, she responded, Oh, sorry, Max. I should have introduced him when you arrived. This is Charlie. Long story, but I won't bore you. She attempted a laugh, but it faltered. I could only speculate. Patty agreed to discuss things with Tammy and told her to contact me if she was interested. It didn't take long for the call to come. The sisters had talked, and Tammy expressed how much she missed occasional interactions with the girls. She was subdued, avoiding any mention of Kirsten or prying for information. We set ground rules. No drinking around the girls, no visits from her partners at my house, and she had to register as an off-campus mentor with the Dean of Student Affairs. The last condition kept her accountable. If she messed up badly, it could jeopardize her position. She had to control her behavior. Whether she saw this as a chance to stay connected with my life didn't matter then. She wouldn't be living in the house, and her visits would be limited to 2 or 3 times a week at most. Besides, I would be in Maine with Kirsten regardless. You know you'll have to deal with her again at some point, right? Kirsten asked, one evening, in bed, before we flew back. Maybe. We'll see. The sky above was a brilliant blue as the morning sun neared its zenith, casting its light on us as we bobbed on the ocean waves. After I had lifted the pot from the water moments earlier, the little girl struggled to open it on deck. Her determination was unwavering, so I sat back and observed her efforts. With a determined grimace and gloves rolled to her elbows, she finally managed to open the hatch and reach inside. The dark green crustacean with its large claws probably had other plans, but she deftly pulled it out and dropped it into the white plastic bucket at her feet, adding to the 4 others we had already collected. We were about 100 yards offshore, where my 8 yellow and black buoys marked each lobster trap on the ocean floor. Etta's mother stood on the dock, watching our progress attentively. Etta, a precocious 6-year-old, named after Marlene's grandmother and Kirsten's mother, waved energetically at her mom as we motored back to our mooring. "Be careful, Etta," Marlene called out. I lifted the girl out of the boat, and she scampered off to her mother while I turned my attention back to securing the rigging and preparing our dinner. Pausing at the dock, I looked out at the sea with the distant shore a mile away. This was home now, where I'd grown up and learned the challenges of adolescence and adulthood. Turning 60 soon, Kirsten and I had settled comfortably on Islesboro. She would turn 50 in the fall and still captivated me as much as when we first met. Her touch still stirred me deeply, and she cherished our late-night rides together, grasping that old headboard with affection. We hadn't returned to Charleston since I sold the house on Anson Street a couple of years earlier to the College of Charleston, where it was converted into off-campus housing for the Arts and Humanities Department. Tammy played a key role in facilitating the deal after she took on a significant position as the new department dean. She's since stopped drinking entirely and still lives with her sister in West Ashley, helping to raise her nephew Charlie. According to Patty, she hasn't had a significant other since our divorce. Satch sold Henry's house and used a small portion of the proceeds to invest in a dive bar in Key West, taking along a pretty blonde half his age. I can't imagine him attempting marriage for a 4th time, but they seemed quite happy when they visited last summer. It was a peaceful summer evening when Kirsten and I strolled along the lane of our rural island to stop at the tavern for a drink. As we passed by the community church and meeting hall at the north end, we both paused to admire it for a moment. "Do you think this will work?" "Well, it may not have a steeple, but it's white." And we continued our leisurely walk to the tavern.